All right, and now for our last MSI speaker, or MSI intern speaker, we have Alec Youngblood, who came all the way from Port Orford yesterday up to here, and he's going to give us a talk related to tourism, which is his internship. He's from Oregon State University. His major is fisheries and wildlife, and his mentor was Miles Phillips from Oregon CVA and OSU Extension.
Thank you, Chang. Maybe. It's buffering. Oh. There we go. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Alec Youngblood. I am the 2019 Marine Studies Initiative Coastal Tourism Intern, and I spent my summer down in Coos Bay evaluating the online presence and pricing of guided tour operators along the Oregon coast. One second. Okay. And so being a fisheries and wildlife student, the tourism industry was pretty foreign to me coming into this year. There were a lot of intricacies I didn't understand, and being as such, I learned a lot, especially about rural community dynamics and export-oriented industries, and really just sustainable economic development in general. And so, as such, I'd like to begin my presentation by kind of walking you through a brief outline of some of the takeaways that I learned about the tourism industry. So let's begin with where the tourism industry currently stands in the state of Oregon. An industry that in 2018 grossed over $12.3 billion in direct travel spending. The figure here depicts percent change in earnings in green and employment in black across export-oriented industries over a 10-year period from 2007 to 2017. And as you can see, the tourism and travel industry led the way for all of the export-oriented industries in terms of percent change over that time span, especially for employment, being that all but one of the other industries actually experienced employment loss over that time span. And in fact, the tourism industry has seen 9 consecutive years of growth in the state of Oregon in both total direct travel spending and in terms of employment. And for an industry that has experienced such consistent growth, the big questions are who's benefiting the most from the growth and development? Why aren't the other export-oriented industries experiencing similar growth? And is the growth sustainable? Well, as for who is benefiting, rural coastal communities, for one. As most of you probably know, aside from a few urban hubs, the vast majority of Oregon is considered rural, and this includes the entirety of the Oregon coast. And in most rural communities, manufacturing and trade services are far less prevalent, and as a result, export-oriented industries tend to dominate employment in such regions. And as such, travel-generated employment and spending are relatively of greater importance in rural communities, especially coastal ones. The graph here depicts the total direct or destination spending per capita and employment generated by the tourism industry on a per capita basis, and for some of the more populous counties in the state. And as you can see, the blue color denotes, all of the colors denote a different region of the state. Blue denotes coastal regions. And when considered on a per capita basis, every dollar spent in rural coastal communities has a much greater impact on the community as a whole than it otherwise would in other parts of the state, reaching as high as $14,000 per resident of the community in terms of direct travel spending, and the same goes for employment, where in Clatsop County, and not just the coastal region, but the county as a whole, almost 17% of the employment is from the tourism industry. Tourism, however, is just one of 3 export-oriented industries that reign supreme when it comes to employment in rural Oregon. The other 2 being forestry and agriculture and food processing, which is worth noting because, believe it or not, the primary means of employment in a community, especially a rural one, oftentimes has a lot to do with how that community functions and operates on a day-to-day basis. Think of mining towns or commercial fishing towns, communities. So why is tourism booming when the other export-oriented industries aren't? Well, timber harvest and agriculture both tend to be fairly resource-specific and resource-dependent, and thus are limited by the availability of said resource or land to use for said resource. So when members of export-oriented industries in the business of natural resource extraction or consumption are faced with resource depletion or environmental constraints, and really when times are tough for the industry, they tend to enter what psychologists refer to as the mentality of scarcity, which is a very reasonable mindset for somebody whose livelihood literally hinges on what seems to be an ever-dwindling resource. And as a result, they're subconsciously more prone to cognitive dissonance and myopic or nearsighted thinking, whereby decisions are severely biased in favor of the group the person identifies with, the industry, and in favor of short-term solutions at the expense of long-term stability, thereby sacrificing any hope for sustainability and giving rise to the all too well-documented tragedy of the commons. Tourism, however, is more dependent on being able to create a competitively worthwhile experience, and similar to what Amir was talking about in his film, a sense of place for the visitors. And thus, it is either limited by a carrying capacity of sorts or competition as opposed to resource availability. When tourism-oriented rural communities are faced with tough times, the realized coping strategy is to essentially double down by becoming more competitive in their attempts to further enhance the quality of the community, its attractions, amenities, and natural resources. You see, in tourism, economic growth can be achieved by pursuing either quantity or quality, which is to say by unsustainably bringing in as many visitors as you can at the expense of quality, or more sustainably, by elevating the quality of the experience through experiential learning and raising the positive impact of each visitor by increasing per person spending. But how can one effectively achieve both marks? Well, by promoting visitor engagement with local and professionally guided experiences. The only problem is that there's next to no data for guided tour operators and destination management organizations to use in promoting said guided experiences, thereby severely limiting their overall potential. And that is where my project comes in. The third year of an ongoing study, my project essentially entailed using Google search results to identify guided kayaking tours, whale watching tours, and salmon fishing charters up and down the Oregon coast across 15 comparison sites, ranging from Astoria on the north coast to Brookings down in the south coast. And by collecting data and evaluating the online presence and practices and pricing of guided tour operators detected over time, this project more or less aimed to start filling that data gap. As for what we found, in 2019, there were a total of 63 guided tour operators detected. 49 belonged to salmon fishing charters, denoted in orange. 8 were whale watching tours in blue, and 6 were guided kayaking tours in green. And as you can see, all 3 categories experienced positive growth trends over the 3 years. The figures here show the standard tour lengths for each category as they were advertised online. But what I'd really like to draw your attention to is the pie chart here in the middle regarding salmon fishing charters because it was the category that experienced by far the greatest variation in trip lengths as they were advertised, ranging anywhere from full day to 8 hour to 6 to 8 hour to 9, 10 hour, etc. All information that could be very useful if you were, say, a guided tour operator trying to competitively market or price your service. Here we have the average standard experience rates detected over time for all three categories. And as you can see, there appears to be a declining trend for guided kayaking, gradual increasing trend for whale watching, and no apparent trend for salmon fishing charters, which were the most expensive of the bunch. However, when we incorporate trip length, the trip length information from the previous slide, and calculate the average hourly rates for each category, we begin to see a much different story. And as it turns out, guided kayaking is in fact the most expensive of the three categories. Whale watching actually appears to be decreasing in price, and salmon charters actually appear to be gradually increasing in price, which really just goes to show that the value of the study and how incomplete data can entirely undermine how one perceives and responds to a given situation. The final graph I'd like to show you all today depicts the number of guided tour operators detected over time according to region. And while there are more guided tour operators as you move down the coast, what makes this figure really cool is that all three regions, the North, Mid, and South Coast, all shared identical slope values or growth rates of about 4.5 new guided tour operators detected each year, suggesting that the positive tourism trends observed are a coast-wide phenomenon. So hopefully the information revealed in this report can contribute to improving the overall ability of guided tour operators and destination management organizations to better manage and market their services and the Oregon coast as a whole, and to promoting a better overall understanding of the best practices, benefits, and really the untapped potential of the sustainable tourism industry, especially as it pertains to rural Oregon. While this project specifically looked at guided kayaking tours, whale watching tours, and salmon fishing charters, the study was designed with universal implementation in mind, and has the potential to be applied toward any guided tour operator operations of interest or any regions of interest, with only minor adjustments to the data inventory process needed. In fact, the affordability and expandable nature of the study design already has Sea Grant looking into introducing it in other states. Future work should include implementation elsewhere, expanding upon variables inventoried, like you could add how professional the website looks or how regularly it appears to be updated, and potentially adding more categories beyond the three featured here. For instance, nature, cycling, or even wine tours. Additionally, the study would greatly benefit from a true market analysis using actual sales data provided by the guides themselves, allowing for an in-depth investigation into how the online presence and pricing trends correlate with the actual dollar signs. To close, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who helped make this summer a possibility for me, and just that leading up to this summer, much of my work history was more on the ecological and fisheries sides of things. So I'm extremely grateful for the fact that this internship provided me with the opportunity to incorporate more economic and social aspects into my professional development and experience. So big thanks to OSU and the Marine Studies Initiative. I'm excited to watch it continue to grow and blossom over the next several years. Thank you for listening. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Is the price of some of these things linked to the dependability of the tourists? I mean, you might have to charge more if you're not sure that they're going to come kayaking.
A lot of the different guided tour operations have specific, they mention that on the website, saying like all payments must be made the night in advance or in advance of the thing, or pay half now and half when you arrive kind of thing, because apparently that is a problem in the tourism industry. Yes?
It seems like the salmon fishing is kind of different in that there's the reward of catching the salmon. And we know that the salmon populations go up and down and you have closures, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked at that at all for how those graphs have been? I've heard there's less COA out there this year, so.
That is a good point, and it would probably make sense to switch to a different species. But when it came to pricing analysis, we wanted to look at charter services, and then we kind of had to pick one in terms of a lot of times ground fishing will be $120 for the day, salmon $150, etc. And so we just had narrowed it down, and when you think of Oregon, you think of salmon. So the decision was made before me.